The Outsider podcast shares the opinions and analyses of Drew Landry. They are his thoughts and his thoughts alone, and do not necessarily reflect every member of his audience or newsletter readers. Now, on with the show.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry. And folks, thank you so much for making this the best politics podcast west of I-35 in the Lone Star State. So however, whenever, and wherever you are listening and or watching, please know I'm incredibly grateful for your attention. In today's episode, I have another take on the power of rural Texas in this statewide election, and it includes banning books, of all things. And then I have an interview with Riley Rodriquez, who is the Democratic nominee for State Senate District 28. And before I get into that interview, let's get into the big thing here. We're back at it. We're back talking about the power of the rural vote. If you remember from last time, I spent more energy and effort to explain how the races that are close, and they're going to be close throughout this country, they're going to be closer than what people will say that they are. They're going to be decided on the margins, and those margins are going to be the rural vote. And that is much to the chagrin of many others in the urban areas, and especially in my state of Texas, where they like to say that they're the end-all be-all, and they will use the phrase, fish where the fish are and all that sort of stuff and whatever. But I say that with understanding, with that, again, just harping on this whole concept that these races are going to be close. And because of these margins, there is reason to believe that they're all going to be close. I mean, just today, as I'm recording this, the Cook Political Report has moved a rating of a lot of races across the country, and one of them is the one here in Texas for U.S. Senate, and they've went from a lean Republican to a toss-up. They've made that now a toss-up race. They've even done the same thing to the governor race in Texas, and they've done this with a few other races, and I'll put the link to that in the show notes, and you can check those out for yourself. But that stated, there's another reason. I mean, there's another understanding, is what I should say, that must be stated, and that the rural vote is so important, and it's the word's known as voter enthusiasm. Voter enthusiasm is how people are energized about the election, okay? And what we usually see is the party opposite of the president's party, okay? So when a Democrat is in office and it's a midterm election, Republicans are very enthusiastic to go out to vote. When a Republican president is in office, the Democratic side is very enthusiastic to vote. And that's what we're seeing in this go around. Voter enthusiasm is very much on the side of the Democrats this go around than on the Republicans. And I just will show you here a recent survey from the Economist /YouGov that suggests the numbers are really sluggish on the Republican side. I mean, if the GOP does not have a great turnout in these necessary places, meaning areas where they are the strongest, and in Texas, that's the rural areas, they'll be stuck singing the blues on election night. I mean, they won't be singing the reds. They'll be singing the blues. And so how can these people up for re-election, how can these politicians get their Republican base excited about the election? Well, one thing they like to use a lot, and I said this the last time when I talked about how teachers are the sleeping giant in a lot of our states and how they can turn elections, but how they keep these particular professionals divided is social issues. We're talking like abortion and guns, and now we're talking trans issues and whatever else. So we're right back to the culture war. And now we have recently seen this as library books. Okay. Now I'm going to get very Texas specific in my area, very specific in those things. So I just wanted you to know that. And so as I start here, let's understand that in 2026, in my part of the state, this political ploy to try to increase voter enthusiasm in order to get out the vote for the Republicans is for the 2026 midterms. Well, it really started last June. It started about June 29th, June 30th, when Lubbock's State Senator Charles Perry went to a Lubbock ISD, and that's what they're called here in Texas. All the schools are, if there's a lot of like a big overreaching school called independent school districts. And so Lubbock ISD has about 20,000 students or something along those lines with a whole lot of schools in them. And so Lubbock ISD had a school board meeting, and State Senator Perry went to it, and he went to complain about inappropriate books in schools, in the many schools as libraries. And the one who carried it was an online publication called Lubbock Lights. They were the first ones to really bring out this particular story. And so here's essentially what here's what happens here according to Lubbock Lights. He being a State Senator Perry told the Lubbock ISD board that the legislature will take action if the district fails to remove books from libraries that he described as obscene, vulgar, and derogatory. All right. He doesn't. He goes on to say here that they have an obligation to do this. All right. The superintendent agreed with Perry, and agreed with the state senator, and said it's but she can't go into the school libraries and just start removing books. There's a process for things. And the superintendent, Kathy Rollo, said that Lubbock ISD told Lubbock Lights that Lubbock ISD is following the exact law that State Senator Perry and the legislature put into place in 2025. So how do these things even happen? How do these inappropriate books even get ordered to begin with? It's because libraries order books in bundles. That's how they are able to get deals. All right, they don't order on the individual basis here. They order in particular bundles because that's the best bang for their buck. And Rollo goes on to say here that they've learned that that's not always going to be safe to really do that. It's not the greatest safeguard. But that doesn't necessarily help when it comes to this hasn't always been the case, is what the superintendent said there. So in the attempt to try to comply with state law, the Lubbock ISD created what was called the Student Library Advisory Committee, SLAC. It's pronounced SLAC. And so SLAC reviews books and votes on whether they're okay for elementary, middle school, and high school libraries. This committee met for the first time in November of 2025. School board president goes on to say that they felt like that the process, having this board to do this, is following exactly what the legislature laid out. And so State Senator Perry said, well, yeah, it is. It is following the statute, but it's taken too long, is really what he's saying here. It's taken too long. And essentially that's really State Senator's problem here, is that the process is not going as fast as what he would like for it to go. And that's kind of where we are with it. his big complaint is whenever he actually told the school board, he says, I will go back to the Slack process and we'll have statute revisions, and I hope the board can appreciate that. I wouldn't want to be on this committee for love of money. I would ask you, he goes on to say here, I would ask you, the school board, to entertain a different process for removing what should never been on shelves to begin with. And all that sort of thing. Yada, 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 yada. Okay. So he goes to the school board back in late June, and says, hey, look, I don't like how these books are being done. I don't like the process for them being done. Y'all got to do something about this. Well, he comes back a few days later and then tells the same publication that, well, the school board's working with to make sure that this filth, they call it filth, that they can't be found, this smut. Okay, that's the type of verbiage that they like to use here. And it's quite clear, and he goes on to say that everybody's on the same page. They all want the same thing. All right. Well, it's interesting, though, that State Senator Perry claims he's doing all this stuff for children, yet he doesn't want to fund public education. He'll argue that point, which is fine. But the case is what it is. He voted for school vouchers. He bought himself political clout and political time to say he was on the fence. He would say that phrase so many times. I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence. Well, when push came to shove, when the roll upon yonder was called, he was there. And in the Texas Senate, you either are for or against. It's yay or nay. It's aye or nay. There is no abstain. And he didn't leave the chamber to vote. No, he didn't leave the chamber to avoid a vote. Excuse me. He voted. And he voted in favor of it. And then he, and now he's mad. I tell you what, I mean, this is the same type of crap we've seen across the entire country. Why don't you, cut off a bunch of hands? Go and cut off some people's hands, and then tell them to pick up something with their hands, and then get mad at them when they can't. That's essentially what's been done here. But he's getting upset about the process over these library books, being these offensive library books in school libraries. And so, that's where the first ball was kicked, was in late June. Then State Senator Perry, started doing some radio and media tours. And he went on his own little conservative media because that's where he feels comfortable. Most likely that's where he gets all the softball questions thrown. He'll never come on this program. I'd love for him to, but he won't. I know that. And he knows that, because I'd hold his feet to the fire, but that's a whole other conversation. And clearly, this became more of a political red herring than an actual issue. And it came into fruition this past week when the Lubbock area's chapter, I guess, of Turning Point USA decided to get involved. And I'm going to read for you here a piece from the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, that's the Lubbock paper. And they being the Turning Point USA, held a press conference on Monday, just this past Monday, and it held calling attention to these particular books. And the books that they were upset about were the books called Crank, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, and The Female of the Species. Didn't really like that. Found that those three books were in libraries, and they felt that those were particularly inappropriate to be there. And so this particular group is churning up a lot, really trying to get everybody excited to go to this school board with them, because they invited people. They made a big stink about it. Hey, all you fascists, all you fellow fascists, all you fellow black shirts, let's go to the school board meeting and let's advocate with the right words, with the right buzzwords, to get certain books removed out of libraries. Okay. Folks, this is without question what right-wing wokeism is. And look, right-wing extremism is far more dangerous than any left-wing extremism. I just want to be clear about that. I've stated it here several times. There's far more evidence to suggest that violence comes from the right than it does from the left. Okay. I'm not going to go into any further with that. But the Lubbock chapter of the Turning Point USA and all their other black shirt followers, the day after they get involved, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick then throws his big hat, no cattle, into this whole fray. He goes on to threaten school funding and the rating process if these public schools don't get rid of lewd and inappropriate books. It was reported that books are not being banned. They do not belong in schools. What? Huh? I don't know. And then there's another reporter that quoted Patrick, quoted the lieutenant governor by saying he's coming after the books. He's coming after them. Talk about using a particular phrase to go viral. It's exactly what this is. So as ridiculous as this is, there's only one reason for it. And I said it at the beginning, and I'm going to repeat it here. To churn out the votes for the Republicans in areas where they are needed the most. These politicians and these surrogate groups are banking these same voters forget about school vouchers and data centers threatening their areas and somehow think a book is coming to get their child. Be careful of that book. Ooh. Talk about a reach for air. Let's also know what this also does. This speaks to how poor their candidates are who are on the ballot, they being the Republicans. I mean, I wouldn't want to campaign or carry the water for someone like Ken Paxton, who advocated for the 10 commandments to be plastered everywhere, but even he can't follow them. He follows the Ken commandments. And I wouldn't want to carry water for a flat-out racist like Beau French, an Islamophobe, who's flat-out prejudiced against anyone who isn't Caucasian. He probably wants the 19th Amendment to be repealed. I mean, a reporter ought to ask him about that. Do you think the 19th Amendment should be repealed? And if he has any brains, he'd be able to look it up. But I bet he wouldn't be able to actually tell anybody what the 19th Amendment does. Just remember that. These two key candidates are absolute albatrosses around the necks of lower ballot candidates like State Senator Perry, like other particular members who are in state races and county races and all other things who are on the Republican side. So instead of campaigning for these bad faith candidates, because they are, why not get the voters excited about culture wars? It is by far a stretch to do such a move. But the play needs to be called out. This is easily snuffed out. I mean, the dots are so obvious that they are easily connected. I mean, I called it out on Threads. It was reposted on Facebook. And I know that got back to the state senator. And State Senator Perry doesn't like me. He's not my biggest fan. I have nothing but respect for the guy. I mean, him not liking me, that's a him thing. I cannot control how he feels about me. But I'll say this. If he thinks everyone's just going to throw, roses on the ground on which he walks, he's got another thing coming. When you step into the arena and you affect people's lives and professions and people's livelihoods, you're going to be criticized in some way. And the fact that he is a key architect of this whole thing, he and he won't admit it. I mean, I don't blame him, but his fingerprints are all over this. He knows that Paxton and Abbott, Governor Greg Abbott, which his particular governor's race was also changed. Its rating was actually changed. They need rural Texas. They need West Texas to come out and vote in droves. So he gets everyone excited about books. So the meeting happened this past Wednesday night, and Lubbock the Lubbock ISD school board banned 8 books from middle school libraries. And I'll tell you what those books are: Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, Heroine, Kingdom of Ash, Lady Midnight, Lighter Than My Shadow, Lord of Shadows, The Female of the Species, and The Lovely Bones were all voted to stay in high school, but were banned out of middle schools. And it was brought to light that some of these books haven't been touched in a long time. Like, it was particularly brought out by the superintendent that the book Heroine by Mindy McGinnis has been in the high school since 2019. There's one copy of it, and it's been checked out 15 times. In 7 years, the book was checked out 15 times. Folks, this is without question making a mountain out of a molehill. But now you know why. I think you were able to figure this out to begin with. It just needed to be presented to you. This is all about trying to get votes. This is nothing about reading. It has nothing to do about children, nothing to do about parents. It has everything to do about getting votes. These parents and Turning Point USA and all the other black shirts that were involved in this are nothing but patsies for the Republican candidates who are running statewide. Make no mistake about that. All right. As promised, I have Riley Rodriquez, the Democrat going for State Senate District 28, joining the podcast. Riley, thank you so much for being on the program with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. So, Senate District 28, I'm sure you've seen the big district map. This district is huge. Mainly rural areas. What I think your big cities are, Wichita Falls, part of it, and then you have all of Abilene and Lubbock and San Angelo, and then you have a whole bunch of these other kind of rural towns here. Where do you find your time to do any of these things, to do these types of programs? Because you got to be going everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I have 2 small businesses that I run here in town. And luckily I work for myself, so I make my own schedule. I try to spend a lot of time scheduling. I try to schedule usually a month out. Luckily, there's been a lot of organizing of late in the area around data centers and stuff. So there's actually a lot of events and things that I've actually had to go to that probably in the past weren't happening as often. But the mobilization around this thing has really been kind of an advantage that I've tried to use. When you're out here in rural Texas, though, I have 41 counties. So, it's 32,000 square miles, somewhere in there. I have to look it up again, but you have all these little bitty towns in between, and people in those towns aren't used to being politically engaged. So you kind of have to take different approaches to it. And one of the approaches that I've tried to take is really, really trying to spend my time focusing on organizing, but also just getting out with the community and doing stuff. People will show up if you do enough time. Like, Good thing about rural Texas is it's still running on Facebook. So if you post it 2 weeks out, you're gonna get, 10, 15, maybe 20 people there at a time. So uh but balancing that work schedule, I work 3, 4, 5 hours in the morning, then I'll come home. I'll usually do a couple of campaigning things in the afternoon, maybe for 1 or 2 hours. I do a lot of my own graphic design a lot. I pretty much do my own social media for the most part. I have volunteers participate when I can. Uh, and then late in the evenings, I go and I work at my other job where I train clients for about 2, 3 hours in the evening. Find a little time to lift weights and stuff in between, but it's a good uh, balancing act. I'll say that.
Yeah, it sounds, if only there was like, 36 hours in the day to leave you some
Yeah.
more time to actually do a few more things.
Yeah.
Have you always been on, on the whole political scene? Have you always had some sort of a drive or ambition to do anything with public service?
Not really. I say not really. Now it's time flies. I've probably been politically engaged for the last 10 years as far as just like really paying attention. I think many people in District 28 and throughout Texas have always just focused more on work and getting through life. And you can kind of see that in a lot of the voting records in these areas are very low propensity voting in these areas. But once I started once I started working for myself, I once anybody I think starts working for themselves, they learn very quickly that you need to start paying attention to what's going on with the government very closely. I think like a lot of people my age, especially the millennials, one of the things that got me politically involved was Obamacare. My now I say politically, I say politically aware is probably a better thing. I wasn't doing anything, right? I understood that there were politics happening around me, and people were making decisions. But as far as like activism or anything, no. But my father was in pretty bad health, so he was probably in his early 60s, well, late 50s, early 60s. He was dealing with Medicaid, Medicare, but he didn't have any insurance. He was a cowboy his whole life. So it's very, very difficult for those people to get anything done. But luckily my aunt helped him. So I started kind of paying attention to that. He was on dialysis. Hard to get it's hard to get insurance once you get put on dialysis. So they don't really want to pay for you to do anything. Um, like at all. They just won't pay for it, which doesn't we'll get into that later. But I started paying attention to that. But then also I was working contract labor at the time, and I needed to get health insurance. I had I had lost probably 60 pounds. I had quit smoking, and I was looking to get health insurance. And I looked at the cheap health insurance, and this was probably 2013, 2014, and the cheapest, not Obamacare, but the cheapest private health insurance I could get, which was PPO, which everybody understands like HMO is as good as nothing here because turns out they don't actually have to take your insurance when you go to the doctor here, and you get, I did I when I didn't know that until you actually get health insurance, right? I was lucky enough to have a mom that had a state job, and I got to stay on their health insurance for a little while. But when I had to get my own, I figured that out. But anyways, I had gotten private health insurance and found out it was going to cost me like 400 something dollars a month. So really, I kind of came in on the other side of the Obamacare, understanding that uh, why it was high, but not understanding why because I didn't choose to get it, I had to pay a $200 penalty fee for that on my taxes. Um, and so I had come in from that end of it and going like, well, this is kind of, this sucks. Uh, and then as things progressed, Trump came into I didn't vote in that election. I was not a fan of either of them, and so I was one of those people who said, "I'm just not gonna vote." Uh, the second Trump election, I was like, "All right." Again, I just couldn't do it, so I wrote in I think I actually wrote in Andrew Yang and Dan Crenshaw. I was ill-informed at the time. I was still new in my political knowledge. Uh, and then the last election, after everything we have seen, I was like, all right, I reluctantly cast my ballot for Kamala. And I'll be straight about that. Like I didn't want to cast my ballot really for her either because of Gaza and what was going on over there. Uh, and throughout that time, I became more and more frustrated with, obviously national stuff is national stuff, but as I became more and more politically aware, I became more and more politically engaged. I started engaging in activism and organizing in my town, and I started to notice that all of that frustration and like yeah, just frustration at what was happening in our politics was happening right here on the ground level. And even our own representatives weren't interested in representing what we all thought was best. So I grew up, having grown up apolitical and now running for a political office, it has been quite a an evolution for me.
And, that's an interesting talking point because, well, not really a talking point. That's an interesting point because it evolves for a lot of people. And I think that's really interesting about your story about how you were not exactly political to start. Now you're going out and you're talking about all the things that affect your area and this district. And one of those big things is the whole data center conversation, and you're seeing some weird alliances with this. And politics, it makes for strange bedfellows. It's an old adage about it. And so you're getting some pretty interesting coalitions when it comes to this particular issue. And one I never thought would ever join that would be current ag commissioner Sid Miller, who's
Yeah.
now one of the biggest opponents to this whole thing. What are you hearing whenever? I mean, you usually the conversation is either you're for or against. I mean, you wrote a good opinion piece that appeared in the Lubbock AJ and the Amarillo Globe News about how these things are not exactly the best things in the world. And how did like what kind of molded your thought on that? Did you like because it's going on in Taylor County, which is where
Yeah.
you're from. There's a big project there. You're seeing it, zero, you're ground zero for it. Did that actually help shape your whole perspective on that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. In the beginning, I wouldn't say that I was like, I didn't understand, like many people, I didn't understand what was happening. Flat out. Didn't understand what was happening. In our particular case, it had started out as a Bitcoin mining operation, and then they never did anything with that. And then in about 2023, they came in and took it over. Lantium and Oracle and all those people did a deal and took it over and turned it into a data center. They had already put in the initial permit application, all of that. So the time limit was about to run up on that, in which they would have had to reapply, and that would have given the window for the public to become aware of what was happening potentially. Um, so that kind of, but even at that point, right when they had taken it over in 2023, like there was nothing really happening. Again, as far as we know, there was somebody that bought some land out there, and nothing's happening. And then um, about 2024, 2025. things started to kind of pick up around here. You started seeing more rock trucks hauling in, but you started to see rents start to slowly kind of increase a little bit. Now we are a Air Force town, a military town. We have a base here. So rents typically ride on a decent house. You're right. That rent is riding right about what the military is paying in housing allowances and high housing stipends. That's pretty much what you're going to get for a house, or or a one bedroom kind of low income apartment in 2019, for instance, which is what I was living in. A low income apartment in 2019 was costing anywhere from 1,000 to 1,100 bucks total a month for bills and rent. I moved out of Abilene to start my own training business, and so I moved to a cheaper place, like many people do. The average drive time in our district is about 20 to 28 minutes. So, like many people, which is kind of how that works here, is you want to start your own business or you want to do your own thing, you move 40 minutes down the road, you pay 800, $900 less for bills, and you make it happen. And that's exactly what I did, right? Moved out, paid a little less for bills, moved back into town. Now, normal trajectory, but having done that and then came back, I got in like right at the threshold. Because when I came back here, I came back and got a studio apartment here that had no kitchen, no kitchen sink, a 5'10" tall shower, and I'm not a tall person, so a shower being short for me is pretty dang short. So, and that was $700 a month, in and of itself. And I was lucky enough, and that's in somebody's backyard, right? I was lucky enough to have a solid landlord who also lived in that house. I don't know what that place costs now, but I do know that by the time I moved out of that house, out of that guest house was what it was, I passed 6 different people looking at it to potentially rent it, and they were all the landlord had moved out of the main house, and there were people already touring it. Um, and that at that point, rent for a house like that, which was pretty nice, was sitting at about 1,400 to 1,500 a month just for the rent. Uh, and that was like, all right, even at that point, it was in a nice part of town. Okay, understandable, right? It's close to people's jobs. It's in a nice part of town. That that rent quickly became like just everything was $1,500. Everything was 14, 12, 14, $1,500. And then I started to kind of look around and talk to people more and started getting, got more involved. And then we started seeing more traffic. And it's the normal stuff, right? It sounds petty, but it's the normal stuff. We started seeing more traffic. We started there was a couple of fatalities. There's just more people in general, right? All of a sudden there's traffic where there wasn't traffic. So you start to notice all these things. And then, our media was reporting on it. And me being somebody who was politically engaged and aware was already reading into it. I doesn't Trump announced that it was the biggest thing ever, and so our Abilene officials are pretty hype when it comes to getting any kind of like media coverage. So they were making it a big deal that this was all happening, but everybody was immediately skeptical. And then they found out that these people got an 85% property tax abatement, and uh, pardon my language, but the shit hit the fan. And after that, it didn't matter what was going on. Now, I was already aware of this because I was getting more and more mad because my opponent, Charles Perry, has made his career on water conservation. And the first thing I read about data centers was the amount of water they take, regardless of having a loop system or not. And then I started to read more and more about how our state legislature and our city, who's taken a lot on the chin in our county too, and in some cases rightfully so. But I started to read about how our state has built an entire system since throughout the 90s, since the Reagan era, that has facilitated this type of exploitation and extraction of our communities. I have some friends that are what I would call somewhat movers and shakers in town. They talk to people on the council. They're aware. They have an idea of more inner workings, and I would talk to them and ask them questions, and they would say like, "Well, they can't." And then I'm curious. Well, why not? Why can't you? And then I have to go to, obviously do your research. And at the time, this is a quick aside. At the time, I had a hobby of following the Texas legislature as like kind of a watchdog social media. And I was reporting in 2025 on I say reporting. Uh, I was making posts though about, what was coming out, right? Because they had the vouchers going on, they had the THC ban again, and they had the Ten Commandments. It was a pretty wild session. So, having done that, I was pretty aware of what was kind of transpiring in the economic development side of things as well. So, I just looked into that and noticed that our city couldn't have done anything anyways because the state would have sued them on behalf of the corporation for multiple different things. You can take your pick, right? You can take there's government codes from '96 that freeze that freeze ordinances and everything once an initial permit application is put in. Some of the standards that apply to that don't even require an actual public notice. The turning in of the application to a city clerk or official counts as the public notice. There's little things like that. There's the Death Star law that was passed in 2023. There's where it doesn't matter. And these data centers, if I can uh, go off a little bit more on why this is so bad here specifically, um, these data centers are not only exploiting the laws that our state legislature has put together, but they are also exploiting the corner that our state legislature has put rural places like the Abilene area and Lubbock and Wichita and San Angelo in, because outside of here, it is economically hard for people. The economic hardship once you get out of the suburban esque area of here, it escalates. And when you come into a town and you say, you know, look, you're working off 1.5 million to run a city. We'll give us 95% off. We'll give you 5% of, 200 and 500 million dollars. We'll give you 5% of that, and that'll fix it, and you'll be fine. But at the same time, when they say that, like the other side of that is okay, how much of that 5% is going to go to fix our roads that you're not going to pay to fix? How much of that 5% is gonna go to having to take care of the health issues and the homelessness problems that we're gonna have once this starts happening because we don't have housing. So now we're gonna have to take that 1.5 million and we're gonna have to do as a city, build our own housing, which is gonna take more time because we don't have the resources to do that. So what happens is they can't do that. They're not going to be able to spend the money to build that housing. So all those workers and all that sales tax revenue that would be going there, it comes back and it goes over here. And so, and literally what we're experiencing is they can't stay there in Haskell, right? They can't stay out there in Albany. There's only one hotel. It's only got 40 rooms and there's 5,000 of them or however many. So they come back to Abilene. And so now you got $400 hotel rooms. You got $3,000 a month rent. You got a little 400 square foot apartment for a cool $1,000 a month. And watching all of that, and then going to our representative Charles and being like, "What's the deal with this water? What's the deal with all of this?" And he said, A, that they came to him first, and B, that he didn't even try to stop them. He just said, "We don't. You guys can come here, but we don't have the water." And my biggest issue is if you're planning for the future and planning long terms, why are we just now having these meetings? Why are you calling these things a net benefit when you see what it's doing to your constituents?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. With all the um I like to say problems. I mean, my listeners and readers will know that I'm no fan of these things for a variety of
Yeah, sure.
reasons. One of those big reasons is that those data centers are exempt from paying a sales tax. So all this sort of revenue that they talk about, it's not coming from the sales tax because of a 2013 law that Governor Abbott, no, at the time it was Governor Perry, signed into effect. Of course, 13 years ago, data centers were not what we know them now to really be, but benefit of hindsight, they should have been able to, at some point say, um, maybe we should evaluate that. Let's also know the fact that these data centers, even though they may have an 85% property tax abatement or 90% or whatever for 10 years, they can actually say they can go protest their property tax value because of a 1997 law called equity and uniform. So
Yeah.
their particular property tax rate would be that of a residential. And
Yep.
so, yeah, and so, yeah, so they're gonna, oh well, your value is, at X amount of millions of dollars or whatever. Well, that's not exactly fair to what this house has over here.
Yeah.
And and so there's a lot of reforms that need to be done with this. You get into the legislature, what kind of steps are you going to take to reform the fact that chapter 312 um, that does the tax abatement, and then you have this equity and uniform and the sales tax. Are you going to take steps to try to get rid of those things or reform them in some way? Have they come on your radar? What do you make of that?
Uh, yeah. Well, in short, yes. There are, looking through bills, reading through bills. What I notice the most is, and I try to tell people this kind of stuff. I'm not a person. I'm not a. I hate to say this, 'cause it sounds like a trope. I'm not a politician. I wasn't a politician. I am, in fact, a politician now. Right. But I wasn't a politician, so I just kind of looked at things simply. And a lot of these things just need to be fixed. Just the language. Here's the deal: when you got a bunch of damn lawyers in a room, is it's all about the language. It's got nothing to do with the substance. It's all about how you say it and the way it can be interpreted. And let's take. I'll take something that probably maybe easy for people to kind of conceptualize the Citizens United. It's all about the definition of individual. It's not about it. The word individual is how do we define it, and that's what one of the biggest things at the front of those bills is. What is the definition? Well, in a lot of in a lot of these situations, corporations get to pretend to be an individual. I think number one, we can take some corporations out of those little things right there because you know a great example is something like the Death Star law, as it's called. Um, in theory, right, making something that would prevent a municipality from having a lower standard than the state, right, would make sense because it protects everybody. But preventing something from having a higher standard than the state doesn't make any sense because it only protects more people. It only does a good thing. So these laws are written very vaguely and very broadly. Uh, and we need to drill down. We need to stop using a hammer to try to drill in a screw. Like that's just not going to work. One of the things I want to do it's really simple. I guess low hanging fruit you'd call it. We have an entire grant. We have an entire exemption program for data centers. Let's just get rid of that. I don't care if you have, you know, $200 million investment. Cool. Pay your taxes. I don't care because the guy down the street doesn't get that. The dude who's been in business for 30 years, nobody's coming to him and saying, "You want 85% off?" Because your highest cost is your overhead. Your highest cost is having to pay sales tax on merchandise. that you haven't sold yet, or having to pay property tax on merchandise you haven't sold. And that's ridiculous. But somehow or another, these people are allowed to come in here and get all of these handouts. Like, you don't need a sales tax exemption. You don't need a electricity, at least an electricity one. You know, you want to have a conversation about, like, I don't know, maybe like steel or something from somewhere else. You can talk to the feds about that. But here we just had Snowmageddon not that long ago, right? We have a Drew, we have a legislature that brags about losing a little bit less life in disasters instead of trying to figure out how to fix the damn disaster part, right? It, you know, we have a state that operates on a quantifiable on incurring a certain quantifiable measure of human suffering with every policy they have instead of working on how to not have that be part of it. And so my main approach to all of that when it comes to that is how can we mitigate the measure of human suffering that comes with that? And you know, it may be a bit drastic to say that when it comes to these, but that's what these exemptions, that's what they do to our state. There's a reason that we're number 7 in economy and we're number 50 in quality of life. Republicans like to point that out. They like to throw that in my face like I'm supposed to, like I don't understand that our economy is doing really good. I'm well aware how good of our economy is doing. We're pissed off because we know that, and somehow or another, we're still getting the short end of the stick. Somehow or another, in District 28, it's the median income is still $63,000 a month. I don't know if you know. I've done the math. That ain't much. It's 2,500 a piece. It's averages $700 for childcare a month, right? If you got 2 cars and a kid, you're already behind on bills by the end of the month. So they can spare me the we're number 7 in the world. Well, good. Why don't we do something with it? Because all we're doing is providing an extraction source for billionaires and corporations. And if they're going to come in here and they're going to want our land and they're going to price us all out of our homes, the least they can do is pay their damn property taxes and pay their sales tax. And honestly, I'd like a dividend from all this data they're getting off of us, if you don't mind, because if it wasn't for us using our damn phones and doing all this, you wouldn't have a business. But you know, far be it from me, Drew, to expect anything from the billionaires.
I like that. You talking about rankings earlier, Texas also, while we're great economy and all this sort of thing and terrible with our quality of life, we're also towards the bottom when it comes to our education and spending per student and teacher quality and all of these things that we would want to have positively for our future. We're lagging behind with that. Your opponent, who um he he will also he will adamantly say that he is a culture warrior. I mean, I'm not putting words in his mouth. He will say that he is. There's no doubt about it. And he's now on this sort of a, I don't know, I hate to say kick, but this quest. There we go. Let's say a quest to do this whole book banning thing again. I mean, it was his time in there. They were able to get this whole process to get books out of public libraries and then in the school systems, and now he's also back on this kick to get books out of school public libraries. Um, I knowing history the way that I do, this doesn't end well. I mean, these are not exactly good starting points for anything. Uh, do you think that's something that we should be focusing our time on? Is within education, is doing these things like the 10 Commandments, even though the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate, but doesn't exactly qualify for half those things, and and let alone the fact that um, when we talk about classroom size, student to teacher ratio, and teacher pay, and all the other aspects about student achievement, and this whole voucher thing. This whole book thing seems like it should be like a way bottom of the totem pole type of issue. That's me. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's BS. Pretty much. It's just Christian nationalist crap. They don't they you know, I've always liked to tell I've always wanted to tell this story, and I don't get to talk I honestly, when it comes to data centers, I don't get to talk about education as much because it's all about data centers. So I I grew up in nothing but small town schools. The biggest school I went to was Clyde, Texas. It was a 3A school, and that was pretty damn big for me. Uh, yeah, I went to 5 different schools throughout this district. I started my, kindergarten or my educational career, let's call it, in Miss J's kindergarten class in Anson, Texas, and then we moved my dad got a job at a ranch, and I moved to Hamby, and I went to from kindergarten to 4th grade in Hamby, and they shut our school down, but it was the consolidated, but we had probably 80 kids in that whole school. My whole class had 7 kids in it. I was a straight A student. We went from that school. They shut it down. That was pretty traumatic for a bunch of, 4th graders, 4th and 5th graders. So we go to a school we don't know anybody. Uh, and I was immediately in a class that had about, 20 kids at the time. Not too bad. Clyde wasn't bad school. Went there for a little while, but never had no real issues or anything. Then my dad or my mother had a car accident. I moved to Seymour, and still small school, 1A, 2A school, no more than maybe 100 kids in my whole class. Maybe not even that many, honestly. But still a small rural school. In Seymour, Texas, right? Every school that I've gone to, there's been about 6 or 8 churches on the corner in the town, and more churches than there are people sometimes. Uh, went to then I moved from there. My dad got into bad health, so I moved back to Albany. Went to high school in Albany, and then finished, graduated from Knox City High School. All of those are rural Texas schools. At no point in any of those schools, at any of those times, in all of those red count and all of those schools, did any of those teachers ever try to indoctrinate me with anything other than what they needed me to learn, and maybe if they get me to shut up. But that was about it. And so for me, and throughout that whole time, you're right. Like I was as a young kid, I think we all pretty much, that's part of being a Texas kid, is you're active in youth and church, because what else you gonna do? There's nothing else to do on a Wednesday night. You're either gonna go to church or you're gonna go get in trouble. So in all that time, I was always taught that religion was supposed to be freedom of choice. It was supposed to be, I'm not at all a Bible scholar. I'm not some holier than thou person like Charles thinks or puts himself up to be. Uh, but the way I understood it was, it's supposed to be your choice, and you don't push it on anybody. And as a matter of fact, that was how a lot of people would approach it. If you found out they told you they were talking about religion, they would always come at it with an approach of, I'm not trying to push anything on you. Hell, Drew, my mom's a boomer. She's got dementia. I'm going over there and talking to her about the 10 commandments on the wall, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" She grew up in Seymour in the 50s, and she can't wrap her mm, she's got dementia, but she can't even, you know what I mean? She understands how messed up it is. So when it comes to that sort of thing, like, and let's just be honest, if there was 10 tenets of the LGBTQ community, and there were the tenets of the Quran, and there was the tenets of Hinduism and Buddhism, and they put them on the wall, they'd lose their damn minds. It's rules for thee, not for me. And there's a person here that I have a lot of respect for, and he puts it really clearly. Like, we cannot allow this to happen in our public schools, because we're going to tear each other apart. There's a reason that they did to separation of church and state. There's a reason that this country was founded on the freedom of religion and the separation of church and state. Because They fled religious persecution, and they also understood that the state engaging in religious activity gives religious persecution a sanctioned is becomes state sanctioned, essentially. They're pushing a different religion, and it doesn't matter whether they meant it or not. A Christian nationalist decides to hit a mosque or a temple or anything else, that gives him full on credibility. The state says this is the best religion. Look, it's in my school. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty positive that there's quite a good history of right wing Christian nationalists deciding to take a firearm to a group of innocent people. So for me, it's a no go because we know better. Even our own founding fathers knew better.
The whole thing about that is that it all just drives me absolutely crazy because I don't they I would like for them to connect a dot between how showing a poster of the 10 commandments improves student achievement. I'd like for them to understand to show me how infusing Bible stories, whether it be David and Goliath or whether it be the story of feeding the 5,000 or whatever else improves student achievement. I could those types of things improve student behavior? Maybe, but at the same time, there's other aspects that should be done at home, and there are things that need to be expected at school. The way a child behaves in school is reflective as to how they are at home. I mean, there's enough research on that to go back, it was 60 years. So the you know that is the ongoing thing that I like to really come back to is if you are infused with these sorts of things in your personal life, then you can be that particular person for other people. Teachers and public educators, um, it's been widely established, even in the recent Supreme Court case that was done just a couple years ago, that happened actually in Texas. Trying to proselytize is not the job of public school teachers or principals or superintendents or any of those things. Um, and I mean, it feels like to me that these lawmakers are wanting don't respect public school teachers, well, teachers in general, let alone public school teachers, and two, want to turn them into Sunday school teachers.
Yeah.
And that's an affront to people who are of faith. At least it should be. My thoughts, and a total affront, a total offense to those whose job it is to make sure that students are able to do the ABCs and the one, two, threes. Um, that's just my take on that. I'll give you the last word on that particular issue.
No, I mean, I want my kid. I don't have kids. I'll be fair. To be fair, I don't have kids, but I'm much more concerned about them becoming like functioning members of our society and understanding, what it is to balance a checkbook. What it is to participate in your local elections. What it how it how you should live your life outside of your career, as far as fitness, as far as eating right, as far as going to the doctor, all of these things. Like I'm speaking in an analogy here, but science, math, like that's what they need to do. Your job is not to proselytize to them about anything. The issue that these people have is they want control. And the reason they want control is because they see their children as possessions and not as people. You don't get to do things to my things, instead of, well, if that makes my kid's day better, that's your job for the day that you have them. Your job as the educator is to teach them and to not make their day worse. That's pretty damn simple. Teach them the lesson and not make their day worse. But by doing that, there's this issue, and it's not a widespread issue, but let's be honest, the people that have the people that want stuff, that want this type of thing, want control. And they want control of what's happening, and they're afraid that they will lose that control. That is what that is all about. That is why it's so toxic to people. And we have to, I mean, honestly, what we have to start doing is our politicians have to stop using our teachers as boogeymen before the elections, and then saints when they need to vote. And one of the ways we do that is give the teachers a Democrat to vote for once. But the other side of that is we have to look at children as people, that are to be educated, because they are future adults that will be members of our society. And if we want a society to continue, then these people that we put out in it need to be well educated, and they don't need to be indoctrinated with culture war crap, because now we end up in this system where it's a top versus bottom, and all that the top needs to do is put out one AI ad, and all of a sudden everybody's voting against their own self-interests. I like to say this all the time, like, culture wars are all real nice and fun till we're arguing about it on the bread lines. And then nobody really gives a shit where anybody's going to the bathroom anymore, Drew, because everybody's starving. And that's what's happening right now. I don't know if you know this or not, but I think there's the fifth food has been taken off of our market and been recalled. I have some feelings about RFK Jr. I'll say that.
Well, I'm not going to lie. That would be a whole other show, and I think our feelings on him would, there be no Venn diagram. There, but probably would be a giant circle on that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
um, Riley, just to kind of wrap this up, where can people find you on social media? Where can they donate? And where are you going to be next in the district in the next week or so?
Okay. So you can go to rileyforsenate.org. That's RILEY FORSENATE. There we go. .org. You can go there. You can check out my platform, the issues that I'm running on. It's mostly data centers. Surprise, surprise. You can donate through that link. You can go to my Instagram. It is Riley, the number 4 State Senate on Instagram. On Facebook, you can follow my page, Riley Rodriquez for State Senate. Please donate to my campaign, because we're getting out mailers. We're getting out postcards, also doing some traveling. So this week, tomorrow, I will be in Wichita Falls at the Data Center Forum, and at 6, you can go to my Instagram and find that. And Sunday, there is another data center rally in Wichita Falls. I believe it's going to be at 3. That is also going to be a debate. So it is going to be me, Clayton Tucker, Leilani Barnett, I believe Mark Nair, and James Frank. And then I think a mayoral candidate from Wichita as well. So that will be a big rally. And so I'll be spending a lot of time in Wichita this weekend. And then in September, we'll have our big West Texas Fair and Rodeo. So I'll be out there for about 10 days.
Awesome. Riley, we'll be watching the whole campaign, and as we kick off the fall season. Thank you so much for being on the Outsider podcast. It means a lot for you to take some time to join the show.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I thank you for having me.
Folks, that is all from me today. Thank you so much for listening and watching to the Outsider podcast. Another special thank you to Riley Rodriquez for stopping by and taking time off the campaign trail to visit with me for just a little bit and to talk with you. If you or someone you know would like to be on the show and would like to talk politics with me, all you have to do is shoot me an email, the.outsider806@gmail.com. That's the.outsider806@gmail.com. And I'll talk with anybody. I mean, if you know of someone who'd like who you'd like to be on the show, or if you're that particular person, the.outsider806@gmail.com is the email that you send to me. All right, folks, thank you so much again for watching and listening. I really appreciate your attention. And folks, I'll see you again very, very soon.
Preceding analyses and opinions, they did not necessarily reflect all of his podcast listeners or newsletter readers. Thank you for listening to the Outsider Podcast. Be sure to follow The Outsider on X and on Facebook. Also, don't forget to sign up to be a free subscriber to his newsletter on Substack. Just look for The Outsider. We will see you again.